Hello and welcome to GameSack. Wow, left in Japan 13, huh? Yep. Anyway, if you're new to the show, this is a series where I explore some interesting games that were only ever released in Japan. And a lot of the games in this episode have very Japanese sounding names, so they were likely overlooked by people who are into imports because the names of these games aren't really memorable to English speaking audiences. Anyway, let's check these games out. This is Magical Taru Tokun from Game Freak for the Sega Mega Drive. I've actually gotten lots of requests to cover this game over the years, but I never did, mainly because I never really got into the game. But I figured that this time I'd sit down with it and give it a chance for this episode. You can tell just by looking at the characters that it's based on an anime or a manga. That right there is probably the main reason that it stayed in Japan. Anyway, besides the strange characters and the weird little noises you make, this is a really cool action platformer. You play as this little guy in a cape or whatever, and if you press jump again in midair, his cape turns into bat wings. This won't help you jump any higher, but it's useful for jumping further and also gliding under things that are too low to walk beneath. He has a little cane that he can attack with, but it doesn't have a tremendous amount of reach. However, this little dude can pick up a ton of different objects and toss them in one direction or the other. You also have a life meter which can sustain 3 hits before you die. The game's physics take a little bit of getting used to. In fact, Game Freak would use a modified version of this game's engine in the future when they made Pulse Man, and playing that game feels very similar to this one in the way it handles. The jumping especially requires a bit of care as you can't control it much, and if you spread your wings, there's some momentum that you need to deal with when you land. Still, you do become accustomed to it all after a short while, and the game as a whole is quite enjoyable. There are only 4 stages in the game, but each stage is huge with tons of areas. In fact, the last stage has about 20 sub-stages, though of course a few of them are only a couple of screens long. Still, there's plenty of challenge here, and the game even grants you 3 whole continues. That's not a lot, so be sure to search everywhere you can for extra lives. The graphics are very bright and colorful, 2 words which aren't usually used to describe a lot of Genesis games. Sad, but hey, it's true. Everything here really pops off the screen. The music is fine and it has its moments of goodness, but there's not a ton of different tracks. There are some voices, or what are supposed to be voices, but they sound pretty bad. I usually love it when games have voices, but honestly, I think this one would be better without them. Also, I think the characters could have been reworked and an international version released, but they never bothered to do that, sadly. Check this one out if you can, and don't wait as long as I did to give it a chance. This is a really fun game. This one is called Niketsu Ooyako, and it's on the Saturn and made by Technosoft. This is a crazy beat-em-up, and it's absolutely criminal that this game never left Japan. At the start of the game, you can choose between 3 different characters, each with different attributes and moves. Each of these are super fun to play with. Right away, there are only 3 buttons that you need to worry about. Button B is your jump, and button A is your attack. Sounds fairly basic, but there are actually a very large amount of moves that you can do with each character. In addition to that, each character has some special moves that you can pull off with Street Fighter II style motions on the D-pad with a combination of buttons. The longer I played with each character, the more moves I learned through trial and error. One thing that Tora can do is jump kick the enemies and then bounce off of them. He can do this indefinitely as long as he hits someone after the bounce. Of course, some enemies can be exploited with this, like this boss who is helpless against my bouncing kicks. Each character can also double jump. Combine a jump or double jump with down on the D-pad and you get some pretty nifty attack combos. Finally, the C button is used as a special attack which is unique for each character. These can do a huge amount of damage, but they will also drain a bit of your life. Sometimes it's worth it though, they're all fun to watch. Along the way, of course, there will be tons of items for you to grab. Many of these are weapons, but not each character can use every weapon. For example, Tora and Ryo can't pick up these big bazookas because they're just too heavy. But Rando can pick them up and use them no problem. Also, I love that his name is Rando. Rando won't bother with the other guns that can be picked up by the 2 other characters. This can be somewhat helpful in a 2-player game to make sure one character isn't grabbing all of the weapons, I guess. The same goes for the other items. There's lots of food and drinks that can restore some of your life. Even beer. Ah, refreshing. But if you try to pick up a beer with a younger character, it won't let you because it's an adult beverage. I love these little touches. The game seems mostly normal until the end of the first stage when suddenly you're swallowed by a whale for no reason whatsoever. Then you're fighting inside of the whale, and of course there's people in here trying to kill you and even barrels to bust open. But let's not gloss over these squids with boxing gloves. Or maybe they're octopuses, I don't know. Either way, they want you dead and they're dressing for the occasion. Eventually, you get blown out of the blowhole because that's how whale biology works. And hey look, there's a Sega Saturn on this whale! You better try to grab it, but the enemy certainly doesn't want you to. The graphics feature some fantastic pixel art that's very colorful and crisp. The artwork style of some of the characters reminds me of early Neo Geo games. There are lots of dither transparency, so if you hate dithering, don't play this game at all. It's really best if you just miss out on the fun. The sound effects even sound like the Neo Geo, especially the go sign. But it's not as loud and annoying as the same sound effect in a Neo Geo game. The music is absolutely awesome and it's just what you'd expect from Technosoft. Lots of rock and synth tunes and all of them are good. Yeah. Be sure to play this game if you can. There's plenty of challenge here in the upper levels. Since we in the West are idiots, we didn't want 2D games anymore back when the Saturn and the PlayStation came out. This game was eventually ported to the PlayStation, but the Saturn version is a hair better overall from what I read. I think that either way you can't go wrong. So far we've seen the Mega Drive and the Saturn, so let's shift over to the PC Engine and the Super Famicom. Once again, these have very Japanese names. And don't be shocked when you see this next PC Engine game because it's not a shooter or an RPG. Actually, there's quite a few games on that console that aren't shooters or RPGs, but a lot of the interesting ones came out over here. Anyway, let's check it out. This one's called Genjitsushin Agadama, and it's for the PC Engine. This is another one where you can just tell that it's based on a manga or an anime just by looking at it. This game is an endless runner action platformer. That's right, the screen is always scrolling and there's nothing you can do about it. Can you imagine if you're walking or running and no matter how hard you tried, you couldn't stop or turn around at all? Would your life even be worth living at that point? Well, this kid values his life as well as that of the entire world because he's trying to save it from the ultimate evil. At least that's what I presume the story is. It's not difficult to guess. But of course, initially I guessed wrong. You're actually a kid who transforms into a superhero by merging with his computer. He's training to be a hero. But this game is the real deal. As you run along, you'll shoot enemies, and some of them will drop some items. Collecting certain colored ones will add a ball to your attack bar. You engage this by holding the attack button until it reaches a certain color and then releasing. Each color has a different style of attack, and you'll need to learn which ones are effective against which enemies if you want to get past this game. If you let go of the button between the colored balls, you can get weaker variations of that attack, which is pretty cool. There are also other things that get dropped, like life ups, options that can spin around you, and limited invincibility. If you press down, you can somersault forward, which can be useful in some boss fights. You can jump and also do a high jump by holding up as you press the jump button. This is definitely the key to dodging a lot of the boss attacks. Speaking of the bosses, each stage has a mid-boss and an end boss. These are the only parts where the game stops scrolling and you can turn around. These can seem tough at first, and if you die, it's all the way back to the beginning of the stage and you only have 3 continues. Some stages like the cave stage here are quite long and scroll very slow. This is a boss you don't ever want to die on because it'll take you 10 minutes before you can fight him again, so be careful. It's a fun game and it works pretty well, though the controls do require a small learning curve. I usually just switch on the rapid fire for the stage and then turn it off for the boss fight so I can use my special charge attacks. The graphics are extremely colorful, as tends to be the case with PC Engine games. There's even some nice scrolling here and there. The music is also really nice, at least in most of the stages. In fact, I love the theme from the first stage as it's pretty catchy. This is a fun game, and I wish they would have changed the characters around and translated it and released it in North America. It's definitely worth trying out. Here we have UFO Yakisoban for the Super Famicom from Kid. Surprisingly, this isn't a character based on an anime, goodness no. Instead, it's based on a character from instant noodle TV ads. Think of this game kind of like you'd think of the Burger King games for the Xbox. This is a basic beat 'em up. Apparently the F in UFO stands for food because there's a lot of that here. You seem to have a giant cup of noodles on your head for extra carbohydrate power, I guess. There are enemies wearing teapots as helmets, chefs who throw pies at you, evil French fry guys who keep shooting French fries at you. I hate these guys, by the way, because they'll keep hitting you until you kill them, so make ending their existence your priority. Buttons Y and B both jump. X and A are your attacks, and they're the same attack. You don't have a ton of moves in your arsenal, but you have enough to get things done. You can dash across the screen, and if you're lucky, you can hit an enemy with this. You can hold the attack button down as a meter builds up to squirt ketchup at enemies? At least I think that's what he's doing. You also have some special moves if you press the shoulder button along with an attack button. If you press the right shoulder button, the UFO guy throws rocks all over the screen to damage enemies. Actually, they're probably a food product, but hey, they look like rocks to me. If you press the left shoulder button, you spread what I'm guessing is some parsley, which freezes all of the enemies on the screen for you to beat them up. Sometimes you can get a unicycle, which will absolutely wreck the lives of anyone you touch while you're riding it. It doesn't last long though. As you fight, the scene will change, and I think it's pretty cool how they did this, with the TV zooming in and out. Makes it seem like a show or something. There are always people in the stage watching you fight, so I guess the entire world isn't at stake like it is in most video games. After you defeat a boss, you shoot noodles at them to tie them up and their evil plans are ruined forever. No, not the noodles! The AI can be pretty dumb. Sometimes they'll just stand there, punching at nothing. Only when you get close enough do they figure that, hey, maybe they should be punching at you instead. The graphics are pretty simple. The game ever only moves at 30 frames per second top, so it's a little jittery. Like so many games on the console, it's severely letterboxed as drawing the entire screen top to bottom eats up precious resources that they need to keep the game from slowing down. Then again, I don't get the feeling that Kid were exactly masters of this console. The music is mostly fine. It's nothing great, but it serves the game well enough. The game itself is quite short. It's such an odd game, and I wonder if it was even meant to be a full-on experience since it's basically just an ad for some noodles. I mean, the Burger King games on the Xbox weren't full, fleshed-out games. But then again, the Pepsi Man game for the PlayStation kinda was, so who knows? It's kind of obvious why this one never made it outside of Japan. It's worth a playthrough, but you might only end up playing it once. Alright, let's move back to the Saturn and then on to the Dreamcast. The names of the games in this half of the episode aren't purely Japanese, but that doesn't mean they can't be super weird. Anyway, for the longest time, I used to think that Dead or Alive was the only other fighting game on the Saturn that used the same engine as Virtua Fighter 2, mostly the same engine anyway, but I was wrong. Check it out. Here's Goiken Muyu Anarchy in the Nipple for the Saturn. This is an interesting 3D fighting game from KSS. Supposedly, this game had a lot of the same people who helped with the Saturn port of Virtua Fighter 2. As they were making this, they offered it to Sega as a new fighting game, but Sega noped out and KSS picked it up for distribution instead. You can select from 8 different characters, but if you keep pressing right, you can choose the final boss as well as 4 random dudes who I have no idea who they are. Maybe they're some of the staff who worked on the game? The game itself is set up very similar to Virtua Fighter 2. You have a kick button, a punch button, and a block button. However, in this game, you can't jump by pressing up. You can't jump at all, in fact. There are some extra moves that you can do, but I haven't figured them all out yet. Usually they require tapping a direction a few times combined with 1 or 2 buttons simultaneously. The amount of moves here seem to be far fewer than the likes of Virtua Fighter, unless they're just very well hidden from the player. Still, this game is enjoyable for what it is. There are 8 stages to play through, plus a final boss stage. It can get kind of tough on those last 2 stages, and you'll need to practice for sure. Of course, most characters have their weaknesses, which, as you can see, are pretty easy to exploit. The characters themselves are mostly average, though a few are pretty goofy, like this salaryman guy. I like how sometimes he loses his toupee during a fight. The graphics run in the Saturn's high-resolution mode just like Virtua Fighter 2. Everything looks really sharp, at least on a CRT, and it moves at a locked 60 fields per second. Weirdly, there are still some small bugs during the game, as during the second stage, the characters will flicker on and off, no matter which fighter you're using. And it only happens in this stage, so that's kind of odd. The music is pretty good, but it almost always plays in mono. I didn't change anything in the option screen, mainly because I can't make sense of the option screen, but I know that this says stereo. The game stayed in mono until I beat it for the very first time, and then it was suddenly stereo when the credits started to roll. After that, I chose to play as this guy. And as I played, I noticed that the game was now in stereo. Here's the thing though, when I chose a different character after this, it went back to mono. What an odd bug to have. A sequel was eventually released, but only on the PlayStation. Maybe I'll try that next time if anyone cares. Overall, the game is fun for a goof, and it's good to see more 3D fighting games on the system. I certainly wish that someone would have localized it and fixed the bugs for a release outside of Japan.
Round 1, fight! Excellent!
Zeus R Vasar is a bizarre racing game from Real Vision for the Sega Dreamcast. In this game, you get to pick robo-animals to pull your future chariot. Seriously, what the hell? This has gotta be great, right? Or sometimes you're swimming around a water track, or even flying around an air track. During this entire time, the chariot flops around behind the robo-animals. Can you imagine how sick the person inside the chariot would feel? Well, I think that we can assume that the pilot is very likely a sparsely detailed post-apocalyptic cyborg, so I doubt they would have to worry much about any kind of motion sickness. When racing a single race, you can choose between robo-lions or deer or a bunch of other creatures. They all have their very own unique attributes, which makes them special and loved by every one of their robot friends. Then, you pick a cyber chariot, which will affect each of those attributes in one way or another. For the water tracks, you can pick robo-dolphins or mantas and things like that. And of course, the air tracks feature robo-birds and eagles. The control is mostly simple. The left and right triggers are your brake and gas. You steer with the analog stick. There's a boost meter which charges over time, and when it's full, you can press the X button for a quick boost. Be careful though, because it can become very difficult to control during this time, and it can end up making things worse for you in the long run. The air tracks control completely different, and it's super weird. Basically, each trigger controls one bird. If you hold both triggers down, both birds go fast and at the same speed. Let go of one trigger to steer. You don't really have any brakes unless you let go of both triggers at the same time. This is super awkward to control, and I never got used to it. But I also never lost an air race. I never even came in second place. Go figure. There's a championship with 3 seasons and 4 races each. Beat these to unlock more tracks to race on in the single track mode. Finally, there's a battle mode. Here, in addition to the robo-animals, you can now pick main weapons and a sub-weapon. The races play the same, except now that everyone's shooting at each other. This can be pretty chaotic, let me tell you. However, I was able to reach first place a bit faster than without the weapons. The guns are almost impossible to control during the air tracks because you have so much else going on with the controller all at once. It's not fun here at all. These battle modes can only be played as a single race and not in a championship mode or anything. As you can see, the graphics are pretty plain with repetitive and bland textures. There wasn't much artistry going on in this one, that's for sure. At least it's sharp. I had to turn the sound effects down as they got annoying pretty fast. In fact, I probably need to turn them down even more. Overall, this is more of an interesting concept than a great game. But hey, when you see this in action, you just kind of want to know more about it. And now you do. You can finally die in peace. Let's wrap up this episode with a couple of games on the PlayStation and the Super Famicom. Now, the Super Famicom one is a very strange game, and it can even be kind of tough on the eyes and the ears, but you know what? I'm glad I played it.
Panzer Bandit.
Here's Panzer Bandit from Fill-In Cafe and Band Presto for the original PlayStation. This is more or less a dollar store version of Guardian Heroes. But that's definitely not a bad thing. Actually, Guardian Heroes was inspired by a game called Mad Stalker. But come on, we've got to give the benefit of the doubt to the Sega game here because, well, that's just how I roll. It starts out with an anime FMV introducing the 4 main characters in a similar fashion to Guardian Heroes did on the Saturn. When you begin the story mode, you can choose from the 4 main characters. After that, you select which of the first 4 stages you want to play. You have strong and weak attacks that you can use to bash your enemies to death. If you press L1 or R1, you switch planes. Thankfully, there are only 2 planes to worry about. Sometimes you'll need to jump to the other layer to avoid or attack certain enemies who only live on one plane or the other. Usually the enemies will follow you if you change planes though. I've never been a big fan of this in games like Guardian Heroes, Fatal Fury, or even in this game, but it is what it is, I guess. You press up to jump, but that's fine because this isn't a platforming game. If you press L2 or R2, you can dish out a special attack in the form of puff balls that somehow hurt the enemy. Yeah boy, take these cotton balls and suffer! When the special attack is fully charged, it can be pretty powerful. Each character is unique, but they all control the same way. The handling can be a bit different though, as some are slower or faster than the others. Unlike Guardian Heroes, this game only allows 2 players to enjoy the game simultaneously. Of course, each stage has multiple mid-bosses and ends with a regular boss fight. I do wish that the regular enemies had life bars as they each take a ton of hits to kill. But only the bosses and the mid-bosses have life bars. I mean, it's better than nothing, I guess. All of the main bosses are unlockable after you defeat them, so you have a total of 12 playable characters, eventually. You have 1 life and 3 continues, so although it feels kind of easy, it can be hard to reach the end of the game with basically 4 lives for the entire thing. The graphics are pretty good, and I like how everything is in 2D. It doesn't look quite as nice as Guardian Heroes, but that's fine. I do wish that there were a few more types of basic enemies though. There doesn't seem to be much, if any, slowdown here, so that's nice. The music is generally pretty good, but not something you'll be humming after you turn the game off. The sounds and voices can be kind of annoying. A lot of the basic enemies have this screechy sound that they make over and over, and it gets old pretty quickly. And of course, every character needs to say something in Japanese every time they attack. Does this make their attack stronger or something? Why is this a thing in video games? If I'm punching someone in real life, I just want to punch them. I don't need to announce what move I'm doing. No one cares. I just want to make my fist contact his face. Overall, this is a fun beat 'em up, and I'm surprised that it didn't get released outside of Japan. Maybe it would have been too much effort to translate all of the voices in the game. Hey, I'd be totally fine if they just deleted the voices. This is another one where the voices can go away and it would actually improve the game. Oh well, check it out. Finally, we have Psycho Dream for the Super Famicom, developed by Telenet and published by Riot in 1992. Telenet developed the Valis series, and Riot even published a couple of them. But this game is nothing like Valis. You begin the game by choosing your character. As you progress through the level, you'll slash apart enemies and sometimes even collect colored jewels. These will power you up in various ways. Most are offensive power-ups, meaning that your attacks will be stronger, not that you'll be offended by them. Yes, haha, I am funny. The green ones are defensive power-ups, which will give you a brief shield that uses real, true-to-life polygons. Pretty impressive. Your goal is to get to the end of the stage. Just drop off here and you'll be fine. Be careful though, because you can't just do that willy-nilly. Oops. Turns out you're actually supposed to go in here. Playing as Maria is a lot tougher. She uses a whip and doesn't seem to have as good as an attack range as the sword dude. Once she upgrades and gets her wings, however, she becomes super powerful with heat-seeking projectiles. In fact, this game becomes incredibly easy when you're in this state. Get hit once or twice though and you'll get powered back down, and you'll need to start collecting the colored gems again. The game also grants you 3 special attacks which cover the entire screen. These don't do a whole lot to the bosses, but they're pretty good for the lower enemies if you really need it. Perhaps the most interesting thing about this game is the story, which I had to look up on the internet to find out. Basically, people are getting lost in VR simulators because they're so addicted to the experience. You're a hacker and you're sent in to rescue a girl who may die in 24 hours. Yeah, you're right, I lied, that's not very interesting. The graphics are hit and miss. I like a lot of the odd designs, especially the enemy creatures. The bosses all look really cool, at least while they last. Unfortunately, it can often be difficult to focus on the game as there is usually something flashing or flickering pretty badly and is distracting or just plain annoying. This is another one of those games on the console that is severely letterboxed, and despite that, it has quite a bit of slowdown. I don't think that Telenet really had much of a grasp on the Super Famicom hardware yet. Still, much of it does help give the game an odd, almost surreal feeling. The music isn't something that you'd ever listen to on its own. Instead, I feel that it tries to be odd and surreal itself. It really helps make you feel like you're playing a game that's a little, well, different. The stage designs are usually okay. This one here immediately reminded me of Salamander, which you might also know as Life Force. I mean, you see it too, it's not just me, right? Overall, this is another short game on the Super Famicom. I had a few issues with the final boss, especially since I had to fight him in my weak form, but hey, I did it! I'd say that this game is definitely worth trying. It's odd, it's far from optimized, but it definitely stands out. I think that with a little tweaking, this would have made for a great international release. There you go, more games that were never released outside of Japan for you. And you know what? I had a lot of fun with the games in this episode. Can't believe I never tried whatever that Mega Drive game was called for so long. I'll just call it Magical Coon. That works for me, I guess. You know, people in the comment section always told me to try it, and before GameSack was even a thing, people in the retro gaming forums that I participated in told me to try it, but I just never did. Anyway, what are some games that never left Japan do you think I should try that maybe I haven't yet? Let me know. In the meantime, thank you for watching GameSack. None of the games in this episode I owned. I had to use an EverDrive to record them all. What is the point of having a game collection if I can have an EverDrive instead? I should sell my game collection to GameStop and then just keep all my games on an EverDrive. I'm going to go sell my games right now. I just got back from selling all my games to GameStop. Boy, it sure is weird having all of these empty shelves. I was able to get $5 from GameStop. Wow, GameStop sure doesn't pay much for games.